Hello, welcome to the Paid Search Association monthly webinar series. We're really excited to have you today. First, I want to give a note to our sponsors. The webinar today is sponsored and brought to you by Jumpfly, Clever Programmatic, and Ad World Experience. Our sponsors have been instrumental in helping us grow the Paid Search Association, so definitely a special call out to them today. I also want to introduce our guest today. We have Menachem Ani. He's the founder of the JXT Group. He has been in e-commerce and online advertising for over a decade, developing high-impact marketing strategies for online retailers. I also know him as the PMax guy, and today he is going to be talking to you about getting Google Ads ready for 2024. So welcome. Cannot wait to hear what you have to say, and I'm going to jump out and let you take over.
Amazing. Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Paid Search Association and all the sponsors. I'm excited to be here with you all today. And as we know, there's been an immense amount of change within the Google Ads platform or just in advertising in general over the last few years. And today, I'm going to share some thoughts on how you can be best prepared for the future and how to manage Google Ads successfully in this changing environment. But first, a little bit about me. As Sarah mentioned, my name is Menachem. I'm the founder of JXT Group. I've been doing Google Ads for about 20 years now. And if you ask me something about sports, I don't really know much, but I do know Google Ads. And as I mentioned, what I know now is that today there are more challenges than ever before. And I suspect that many of you today are facing similar challenges. You're probably nodding your head right now. And you're definitely not alone. You know, even before ChatGPT took the world by storm over the past year or so, the ad platforms, specifically Google, but definitely the same could be said for Meta and other ad platforms, have been getting much more automated and leaning into machine learning at an accelerated pace. Typically, this means that there's less manual work for us to do, but the downside is that a lot of people are struggling to adapt. But the truth is that the march towards automation, smart bidding, has been very evident from over the past few years. I'm sure many of you are thinking similarly that the digital landscaping of today is unrecognizable of that from even a few years ago. At this stage, for where we are right now, if you haven't already implemented some form of AI, chances are you're already behind. So this is the reality of today. Then how do we make the most of it? And that's what I'm here to talk about today. One thing that I've learned over the years is to embrace change. Years ago, I might not have had even one broad match keyword in any of our client campaigns. But today, it's something that we lean into. And the same could be said for smart bidding, performance max, demand gen, and many other technologies. In all the different scenarios, you have to consider how smart bidding applies. This is something that Google has been improving drastically over the years. Unlike manual bidding, it can look at thousands of data points in real time, and it's typically miles ahead of manual bids. But does that mean we never use manual CPC? Of course we do, definitely on a lot of smaller campaigns, and I'll get into that a bit later today. But keep in mind that smart bidding can likely outperform manual bids in most cases. So it's definitely something that we want to lean into. But where does that leave us? With automation, AI, I think that the important piece is that it's important to remember that the fundamentals of Google Ads remain the same, regardless of evolving match types, bid strategies, implementation. At the end of the day, Google Ads fundamentally is the same as it was years ago. I'm sure that lots of you remember manually updating your CPCs many times throughout the day. Is that something you really enjoyed to do? Or would you rather focus on something more impactful? being more of a strategist and less of a media buyer. And by the way, if you're running ads on like Amazon PPC, it's still a very manual, but ultimately the old roles are becoming obsolete. And there's a new approach that we can embrace, which is to guide the algorithm, guide the campaigns, allow the algorithm to focus on the heavy lifting, and we should focus on strategy, creative, and making decisions that can drive the business forward. Like I mentioned, I resisted change for a long time because I wanted control. But ultimately, I realized that automation and AI are just another tool in the toolbox. And I think how we use it is important. And it's definitely not too late to adapt. So today I'm going to talk about Performance Max, smart bidding. But first, I kind of want to take a step back to guide you in from the 10,000 foot view of how we think about things, how to run the business, down to some winning strategies of how we implement this framework, and finally some more granular tactics of things we can do in specific campaigns. Where does Performance Max fit into all of this? I think that something we've seen over and over again is Google wants us to be less specific. And so how does that work with everything that's going on? And so here's my framework to help you succeed. I'm going to start with my guiding philosophies of how do we think about things in 2023 and beyond. I think the one message that I've learned over the years is you need to have an open mind. And what this means is letting go of long-held beliefs. If you've done something a certain way forever, even if it works, be open to trying new things. Try another approach that you may have heard about. Try something different and see what happens. This is super important. And I can think of countless times over the years where this has helped me embrace new technologies, but most specifically with Performance Max, something that a lot of people were hesitant to jump into. Taking the lessons I've learned of coming from phrase match to broad match to trying new things is jumping in head first and getting an edge on the competition, which is what I'm getting to next, is being okay to adopt new technologies early, try new features, campaign types, strategies. By testing earlier, you get a first mover's advantage in the marketplace. Your competitors might still be too afraid to try it. You can jump in head first. And this doesn't mean to go crazy. Take a small portion of your budget and try something new and see how it goes. But most importantly, keep in mind what is ultimately driving your business forward. It's very easy to get stuck on, cheap bids, a specific ROAS in a specific campaign. But at the end of the day, what really matters most is profit. So make sure that you can tie in all your systems together and get as close to profitability as you can within your campaigns. Don't focus too much on the campaign performance as opposed to how it's impacting the larger business. And sometimes you need to bring other people on board. If you work at an agency, you got to bring clients on board. If you work in-house, bring in other stakeholders, bosses, and figure out how to get as close to profit as you can, because that's really what drives success through any type of ad campaign. So that's how we think about things. And now I'm going to share some of our winning strategies, like how do we make the most of the current landscape? For starters, I think it's important to realize that technically, while Performance Max unifies the best of search and shopping, that capturing demand with social and display of creating demand, it's important to realize that campaigns like Performance Max are more algorithmic in nature. The old mindset doesn't really work. And while new technologies can be difficult to come to terms with, don't be tempted to try to hack the system and force it to behave like a legacy campaign. My recommendation is put in the work to skill up and make the most of Performance Max. Again, trying to make it work like you would in a search campaign is likely not the best approach. And this takes you to understanding how it works. And again, I'll dive into some more technical ideas later, but fundamentally, you have to think about data as the accelerant. Data is like coffee. You feed the system data and it can do better. Google did recently announce a new data manager to simplify data collection. And at this stage, if you're not importing offline conversion data into Google Ads or customer data, I believe it's not even optional anymore. Set up enhanced conversions, connect your CRM, and so on. I know a lot of people will say, Google doesn't show me the data. Why should I give it my data? But the reality is that without sharing data, you won't get the results that you need, which is important, especially if you're working with lead generation campaigns. I'm sure you've heard people say Performance Max does not work with lead gen. I know that that's not true because I've seen it work for lead gen. And to me, that approach is wrong. I like to think, how do we make Performance Max work for lead generation? And the answer to that is by feeding the system more data. Give it from both sides. Give it strong audience signals based on who your customer is, so it knows who to target the ads to. And most importantly, connect your sales pipeline from your CRM so that it can differentiate between a good and a bad lead. That'll help the system find the right performance for your business. And it's important to remember that unlike legacy campaigns like search and shopping, performance is not as immediate if you're using something like Performance Max or smart bidding, even on search and shopping. It's important to think long-term. Approach problems more like a holistic marketer and less of a media buyer. Because at the end of the day, if you've implemented a strategy based on strong data, just be patient. Give the system time to achieve your goals and don't expect results on day one. Plant the seeds and water it lovingly. At the end of the day, Google has millions of data points that it uses to make decisions in real time with smart bidding, broad match, and so on. You're never going to see this data, but it's there and it works. So lean into it. And so what does this look like when putting this into practice? Knowing the capabilities and constraints of the platforms today. What does this look like for an e-commerce brand, a lead gen campaign? Let's talk specifics. And today I'm going to talk a lot about smart bidding, Performance Max, whether it's for e-commerce or lead gen, scaling Performance Max, and lastly, demand gen. So let's start with smart bidding. As I mentioned before, why is smart bidding important? And how can you use it to your advantage? Smart bidding, like I said, uses in real time, it looks at about 1,000 plus data signals. It knows everything about the user, what they search for in the past, what kind of websites they visit, what time of day, device they're on. It knows the likelihood of a specific user converting over the next one. If you take 100 people searching for the same exact keyword, there are specific users that are more likely to convert than others. And smart bidding will use that data to help you find the specific consumer most likely to convert. With sufficient data, it will likely outperform manual bidding most of the time, keeping in mind that it wants to see at least 30 conversions on a monthly basis. If you're using target ROAS, value-based bidding, it wants to see at least 50 conversions. That, as I mentioned, with smaller volume campaigns, you likely want to stick with manual bidding so you can control it a bit more efficiently, especially if it doesn't have enough of a data signal. But I think that most of the time you're going to want to lean on smart bidding, especially if you can feed the system the right data. Now, when it comes to budgeting, I like to think about how do we maintain what a campaign is spending. So there's really two ways to control spend of a campaign. One is by bids. If you put a budget of $1,000 a day, but your bid is not high enough to buy $1,000 worth of clicks, it's not going to spend the full budget. So sometimes we'll artificially inflate a budget knowing that it's unlikely to spend more than a certain amount unless it thinks it can hit a certain KPI. And so this is a great way to take advantage of efficiencies when the smart bidding platform sees it. So if you're using smart bidding and you have a target ROAS of a specific number, if it doesn't think it'll get that metric, it won't spend it. But let's say for whatever reason you're running a sale, higher conversion rate than normal, and so on, it can go dip into that extra budget. Only use this if you're watching it closely, because otherwise you can overspend. But typically you're going to manage your budgets with the understanding of, if you set it to $500 a day, that's the most that it can spend. Again, the system will and can spend up to twice your daily budget on a single day, as long as it does not exceed the daily budget multiplied by 30.4 days in the month. So we like to use a mix of smart bidding and budgeting to control your overall ad spend. But now diving into that, which bid strategy is right for you? A lot of it varies on your business type, and there's no one simple answer, but typically we like to start out with manual bids and then slowly migrate to smart bidding as there's more data available. Again, there are many cases where you'll stay with manual bidding, especially with smaller budgets where you're not looking to scale. You're just looking to capture maybe local market share on a specific service. But in all cases, I think that the most important thing to keep in mind is the mandate of each bid strategy. When you're using smart bidding, if you utilize a max conversion strategy, your mandate to Google is spend the full budget and get the maximum number of conversions. So this is likely to spend the full budget. If you add on a target CPA to a max conversion strategy, the mandate to Google changes. Instead of spend the full budget and get me the most, it's spend as much of the budget as you can while maintaining a specific target CPA. And the same is said for a max conversion value. You're telling the system spend the full budget and get the most revenue. Again, likely to spend the full budget. But when you add a target ROAS, you're telling the system spend as much of the budget as possible while maintaining a specific target ROAS. And so again, if the system doesn't think that it can get that target, it won't spend the full budget. So one of the things I like to think about is, by choosing your bid strategy, what are you telling the system? And that's something that's very, very crucial to success. And again, remember that the system needs a minimum of 30 conversions for conversion-based bidding and 50 for target ROAS or conversion value. So now that we've established your budgets, your bidding, your strategy, let's talk a little bit about the different audience targeting options available within the different campaign types. As you know, Performance Max utilizes audience signals, whereas other campaigns use audience targeting. So it's important to remember how Google uses the audience signals. You cannot target a specific audience directly. You're giving the system pieces of information, whether it's your customer data, search terms, competitor names, and so on. And you're telling the system, this is who I believe is my ideal customer. The platform will then utilize this data to find whoever it wants, whoever it believes is most likely to convert in your campaign, but not specific to that audience alone. I'm sure that many of you have seen a Performance Max campaign running without audience signals, and it's definitely possible to find success that way. I'm sure I'm guilty of it too, but I highly recommend adding audience signals to every Performance Max campaign, because again, it's just another piece of data that the system could use to fine-tune who it's targeting. But again, remember that the system can target anyone that it believes is likely to convert. And so that's Performance Max. On other campaigns, YouTube, Demand Gen, there's more specific audience targeting. You choose the actual audience you want to target. With Demand Gen, you can also build lookalike audiences. So just understand the difference between audience targeting and audience signals and how they work, and use it to your advantage. The other important piece, and this kind of ties into the different campaign types, but it's very important to set the right goals. Train the campaign. What should it go after? You can use the account level goals or set them up on a specific campaign level. For Performance Max, when you're running e-commerce, you likely want to go after purchases. If you're running a lead generation campaign, this becomes a little more important to focus on because lead quality becomes more of an issue, and I'll dive into that a bit later. So you want to make sure you're going after the right conversion actions. But ultimately, with any campaign, a running theme with smart bidding is that you need to provide better inputs so you can do less of the heavy lifting. And another piece of this is exclusions. Give the system a better understanding of what to focus on. So for a search campaign, negative keywords. For a display or video campaign, it could be audience exclusions. For any campaign, you can use a new customer bidding, tell the system focus on specific customers that have never bought from you before. And then for Performance Max, of course, you can use brand exclusions, but it in the opposite way of targeting consumers. Make sure you're telling the system what not to target so that you can focus on driving your business forward. So let's get into Performance Max. And there's a lot to talk about this. As Sarah mentioned, we've been using Performance Max a lot, and there's a lot of different ways that you can set it up. It's definitely not as simple as it seems. But how do you know which setup is best for you and your business? A true Performance Max campaign, as Google intended it to be, is basically a full funnel campaign that combines that search and shopping with display. Performance Max should bring you traffic from the bottom of the funnel, people who visited your website, maybe searching for your brand and so on. But it will also bring generic search terms and more upper funnel prospecting through display and video components of the campaign. Now, if you are a brand that is selling commoditized product and you typically lead with Google, spending more of your budget on shopping versus social, then setting up Performance Max to run in a smart shopping style is probably your best bet. By excluding copy and creative on the asset group and only giving it a data feed, you force it to focus primarily on shopping because it can only create ads with a data feed. Now, this is not purely shopping like smart shopping may have been. There's going to be some display component to the campaign, but it can only create ads with the information in your product data feed. And this is, going to be your title, description, picture, price. This can only, obviously this is for e-commerce and not for lead gen. But on the flip side of this, if you're an e-commerce brand that is paid social first, you're spending the majority of your budget on Facebook or Instagram, TikTok, and so on, then True Performance Max is likely a better option for you. Start with that strong data feed, but add your best performing creative from paid social so that it can target consumers outside of search and outside of shopping. You hear a lot about smart shopping style Performance Max. I don't know if a lot of people try what I call paid social style Performance Max, and this is something that we do for lead gen where there is no data feed, but basically running a Performance Max campaign with no data feed. So it forces the campaign to focus more on display, video, discovery, and some search. This, again, could work really well for lead gen campaigns or e-commerce companies that are seeing success with Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and so on, and already working well in standard shopping and have no interest in testing the shopping component of PMax. But the important thing to keep in mind with this is that you do need strong audience signals because a product data feed tells the system these are the products you're selling. When you're using paid social style campaigns and you just have ad creative and a landing page, it's a little more important to tell the system who to go after. And I'll dive into that a bit more soon. So let's talk about Performance Max for lead generation. And the main difference is how is lead gen different than e-commerce is that there's no real-time revenue. Typically in Google Ads, you're tracking leads. Maybe you're tracking phone calls, form submissions, chats, but it doesn't know what turns into a sale. And while I am a big fan of machine learning and automation, again, there's nothing like a strong search campaign to gather data. You get impression share, click share, and so on. So typically what we do is we start with a search campaign, give gather some data, get some pixel data into the ad account. Later on, you're going to add broad match, smart bidding, and then ultimately you'll layer on Performance Max. Once you're capturing the search impression share on the search side, start to pull in Performance Max on top. This way you get the efficiency of search. You're pulling in, the search traffic around phrase and specific broad match keywords, and now you can get the scale of Performance Max as well. But as I mentioned, it's really important to remember that you have to give the system data, because ultimately Google Ads is going to track calls, form submissions, and so on. These can be very prone to spam. If you just turn on Performance Max and you're tracking form submissions, chances are you'll get a lot of bot traffic. And what happens is the system sees, oh, wow, I got a conversion. Let me go after more of that traffic. I've seen someone on Twitter call this the feedback loop of doom. And it puts your campaign in a very bad place where you're just getting crap leads, your sales team is getting upset. And so by importing offline conversion data, you're going to tell the system which leads are worth more to you, and it can start to focus on that. You can implement spam filters on the landing page, reCAPTCHA, things like that to block spam from submitting the leads to begin with. And then the next thing I would say is that it's important to understand how these two play together. So you're running a search campaign. You've got very specific keywords that you're targeting. How does Performance Max interact with search? So Performance Max is Google's favorite. Anytime there's overlap, PMax is going to get priority. The way to ensure that you have good coverage on a search campaign is to understand how it works. So there's something called what Google calls identical queries. So if somebody searches for a keyword that sits in your search campaign, regardless of match type, the search campaign will take precedence. If the search term they search for is not sitting in your search campaign, it'll likely fall to Performance Max. So again, it's important to have a good amount of keywords in your search campaign, regardless of match type, so that you get the efficiency of search, capture the full market share, and then layer on Performance Max, which will find additional keywords, additional search insights, and then it will layer on retargeting and display as well. Something else that I recommend is typically, by default, these options are checked off in the campaign settings. And what happens is that the system will start sending traffic to any page on the website, building its own assets. This can be good in certain cases, but I typically recommend leaving these options shut off so that the traffic is focused specifically to the landing page that will convert well, that speaks well to your products. Again, you got to try both and see what happens. If you're going to use the automatically created assets, make sure you look at the landing page reports in Google Ads to see where the traffic is going and see if it's converting well. So that's Performance Max for lead gen. What about Performance Max for e-commerce? Is it really just set it and forget it? I think we've seen a lot with smart shopping. People just set it up and let it roll. With Performance Max, I'd say that it's not really so easy to just set it up and let it roll. As you saw, there's a lot of different ways to set it up. And here's a framework that can help you succeed. So again, if your brand leads with paid social, you want to take one approach. If your brand leads with search or shopping, you want to take another approach. The way we look at it is standard shopping is great at pulling in bottom funnel traffic and converting. So if you're selling highly commoditized products where it's not your product, you're a retailer, you're selling products from a dozen brands, hundreds of brands, thousands of SKUs, you're really competing on price, chances are that standard shopping will work well for you because you don't need to follow the customer through the full life cycle. They're searching for something, they're ready to buy, just pull them in and get the sale. So standard shopping can work well in those kind of places. But where Performance Max really shines is that when you need to follow the customer through different steps of a purchase journey, because it hits those different levels of the funnel. It starts at the top of the funnel with some more awareness type of stuff and comes down to more generic search in the middle of the funnel, down to retargeting and brand search at the bottom of the funnel. It understands the full life cycle of the consumer. But again, typically my approach is start with something more manual. Like with lead gen, we start with search. With e-commerce, I'd like to start with shopping campaigns, start with manual bids for a brand new account, add smart bidding as you get more data, and then ultimately layer on Performance Max side by side. This way, again, you get the efficiencies of that more manual campaign where you see the data, you can push towards specific search impression share, click share, and so on, and then use Performance Max as a tool to help you scale. And where does your account structure fit into all this? Again, simplicity is key. I like to use a more condensed campaign structure. Fewer campaigns typically allows more data to flow through a smaller data set. So the algorithm has this increased efficiency to create new campaigns when you need to, specifically around budgets, goals, or location targeting. So like if you have different products that you want to allocate a different budget to, maybe a seasonal campaign, a specific sub-brand or collection of your products, and you want to give that more firepower, those are the kind of things we think about when building out new campaigns. I like to have a reason. Why am I building this new campaign, and what am I hoping to see from it? And then within each campaign, how should you structure the asset groups? Again, the recommendation is typically to segment it in a similar manner to how the products or services are broken out on your website. So similar to your navigation on your website, breaking it out by different products, services, and so on. We don't usually use two asset groups with the same product or service targeting different audience signals unless you're using different copy, creative, and messaging to target completely different types of audiences for the same products. But the rule of thumb is less is more. Try not to get stuck in that old mindset of granularity, and condense as much as you can. So outside of the audience signals, for e-commerce, the most important way to impact the traffic quality is the data feed. This is making sure that your product data that you're synchronizing to Google Merchant Center is robust, keyword rich. Make sure you have strong product titles that have the right keywords and search terms in there, descriptions, the right product identifiers, UPC codes. Make sure that you're taking full advantage of all the data that you can send the system, because this is what the algorithm uses to figure out when it should surface your product. By having more keywords, more descriptions, proper categorization, and so on, you enable the search algorithm to surface your product in more auctions. And this is something that a lot of people don't look at. I highly recommend that you pay attention to this. Now, something that is also important is that especially if you're running Performance Max side by side with shopping, is looking at the different listing groups. You can exclude non-performing products from a specific Performance Max campaign and let it fall back into a standard shopping campaign. Using your custom labels to segment products, you can build out different asset groups and really line it all up so that it's targeting the right products in a way that you can succeed. So these are some of the ways that you can build and find success with Performance Max, but how do you scale it? So the answer to that is typically just like everything else, lean into what works, make incremental changes, and try to push new customer acquisition. So some of the ways to do this is you got to get a bit creative, because reporting options for Performance Max are somewhat limited. But there are workarounds, and you can find a nice amount of data by looking at different places in the Google Ads platform. Something as basic as in the Campaigns tab, segmenting your performance by device, conversion, day or time, and so on. You can see data that's not super easily accessible within the campaign itself. This might help you understand, okay, all my customers are coming from here. This is where we're seeing conversions, and so on. You can also look at the traffic type, see where the total ad spend is in the listing group and compare it to the overall spend of the campaign. How do you know, for example, if you have a full funnel Performance Max campaign that is creating ads from your data feed as well as creative assets that you've provided, if you look at the total spend of the campaign versus the total spend of the listing groups, you can get an idea of performance on the asset groups based on whether it's creating ads from the data feed or whether it's creating the ads from creative assets. And this will help you understand which direction you should push in. If you're seeing that the product listings, the shopping components are driving a better return on ad spend, maybe focus more on that. Maybe remove the creative assets and let it push, only in these listing based ads. And the same on the flip side. If you see that creative assets are working really well, lean into it, test new creative, push it harder and see what happens there. Also, something I touched on earlier is the new customer acquisition tool. If you're finding that Performance Max is not driving a lot of net new revenue and you want it to focus specifically on new customer acquisition, test these settings here. You can synchronize your customer list using a tool like Zapier, Klaviyo, and so on, and tell the system only bid for new customers. You could also tell it to just bid higher for new customers than existing customers. The only thing I would tell you is just be careful when using that setting. It's going to ask you to input a value and it will report that as revenue. So for example, if you say that new customers are worth $20 more to me, it'll report an additional $20 in the conversion value. So just use that sparingly. Typically we just put in like 1 penny or something like that, so it doesn't skew the reporting too much. But this is a great way to have your campaign focus on driving new customer acquisition. And again, this is back to the lead component of the campaigns. But if you really want to scale your Performance Max campaign for lead gen, is that you're going to need to tell the system which leads are worth more to you. And the way we do it is we typically track leads with a value of 0. Somebody calls in, somebody fills out a form, just put in a conversion action with a value of 0. And we try to connect the CRM. And once a lead, let's say, gets qualified, you give it a value of 10. If it moves to like, you sent out a proposal, give it a higher value. And then once you close the deal, you get the sale, send in the real revenue data. Because ultimately with Performance Max, there's 2 approaches you could take for lead gen. One is CPA-based bidding. Always connect your CRM, but bid towards qualified leads instead of just form submissions. Or you can actually bid based on target ROAS, telling the system for every dollar I spend, I want to see a certain return on my ad spend. And in order to do that, you need the actual revenue data to be coming back in from your CRM. So this way it knows how much revenue a closed deal is worth to you and who those people are. Because over time, the system will start to see all those conversions come in and it can start to focus on finding similar users. You can't always compute the values of real customer data. Sometimes we'll use an approximate number, but this is super important if you want to use Performance Max at scale for lead generation. So that's a lot of Performance Max. And I want to think a little bit about demand gen. I've been using discovery ads for a long time. Like how Google recently started to roll out demand gen a bit more. And I'm sure some of you have started to play with it. I want to understand a bit how it's different, how it plays with Performance Max. Where does demand gen fit into everything else that you're doing? Because remember, Performance Max was originally touted as a full funnel campaign. But at the end of the day, it is also very conversion focused. Typically, any upper funnel traffic that is driving is more likely to convert, or at least hopefully it is. But from what we've seen so far, demand gen pushes towards creating awareness, like real upper funnel traffic. And if you're familiar with Facebook ads, it'll look very similar. But let's jump into how is demand gen different than discovery, which it replaces. So there are a few main differences you can see in this screenshot, but primarily it adds additional placements like YouTube Shorts. It adds click-based bid strategies, So you can create a lot of top funnel traffic. It adds new creative options in the shape of video, and allows you to do more with carousels and image ads and so on. And lastly, it adds lookalike audiences, which is something new-ish for Google. They've always had similar audiences, which have been depreciated for YouTube. But Demand Gen allows you to upload your customer list and target lookalikes. So target top 5% of users in the United States that most closely match your customers. This is a great way to really push top funnel traffic to your website and introduce new people to your product or brand. In my experience, it's not something that I'm gonna throw at every account. These are some of the recommendations from Google. They want you to set your target CPA at least 2x higher than your standard campaign, remembering that it's top upper funnel and it needs to really generate new traffic that's not likely to convert. Much higher budgets than a lot of smaller accounts could have. And this is typically why we don't use Demand Gen in its current form on a lot of smaller accounts. And lastly, just like remember that it needs time, because these are all like very cold traffic. You got to give it time to really gather data. What I've seen work for us is about setting a budget to about 5 times your target CPA. And again, I don't like to use it unless like the budget I'm going to allocate is going to be a small percentage of the overall ad spend, because I don't want to go crazy. If you allocate too much of your budget to something like this and it doesn't work, you can throw everything off. So I like to really just start small. Again, I don't recommend Demand Gen in its current form for really small budgets. Once you've kind of tapped out search, shopping, Performance Max, and so on, that's when I would layer on Demand Gen to start driving some new upper funnel traffic. I think from all the tests that we've done so far is that what we've seen is that accounts that have a ton of historical data, it can work better because it already knows a lot about who to target based on the pixels, the conversion date, and so on. Again, smaller budgets are going to struggle because it just doesn't have enough. It all comes back to data. If you think about it, if an account has a ton of historical data, it can perform well because it knows who to look for. And the same thing, smaller budgets might struggle because it doesn't have enough data coming through. I would say that you could expect a little bit of a struggle in the beginning to get your CPA to hit your conversion rate. But if you give it enough time and enough budget, you should be able to get there. And again, it all comes back to data, getting the right data so that it can succeed. So that's my Demand Gen. I think that ultimately the takeaways that I have is like, smaller budgets, run those legacy campaigns, search, shopping, manual bidding. But as you start to scale, you're going to want to lean into smart bidding, automation, Performance Max. And with that, like, be patient, make gradual changes, steady changes, incremental, always keep it simple, and try to give the system as much data as you can, because data is what it needs to succeed. But at the end of the day, have realistic performance goals and be patient with it. Give it time to gain momentum and see the success you want. Like I've said numerous times throughout this talk, is that the ad platforms are getting more and more sophisticated every day. They're leaning into these machine learning algorithms, automation, and so on. The upside for us is less button pushing, but the downside is there is a struggle to adapt. And so my approach is always get started early and get ahead. And that's all I have for you today. I hope you found my talk insightful. Looking forward to continuing the conversation. You can find me online on X, LinkedIn, and so on. Thank you all.
Thank you. I personally learned a ton. So the good news is we have a lot of questions in the chat. So I'm going to go ahead and first and foremost, just talk about the sponsors one more time. Jumpfly, Clever Programmatic, and AdWorld Experience are our sponsors. So we thank them for sponsoring the Paid Search Association today. And let me go ahead and get to these questions. So I'm going to start at the top. And if for some reason there are extra questions, we can always answer them in the paid search Slack channel as well. And then also the last thing I want to say before we get to this is we are going to be doing these webinars monthly. We're scheduled all the way into 2024, and we're so happy that everyone was able to join us. So going with the first question, expectation setting. So a lot of customers and clients and brands sometimes struggle to understand the time that it takes. This actually goes with the question that I had, is explaining to people that are just getting started in paid search. How do you talk about the time and teach people that patience?
Yeah. So that's a question that we get a lot too, especially for businesses that are newer to advertising online. It's, they have a small budget, they're going to spend X amount of dollars over the next few months. I think it's really important to express, like for us, like I tell people all the time, is like the first 4 weeks of the campaign, don't expect anything. If you get something from it, that's just gravy. Like your goal in the first few weeks is less about results, but more about buying data from Google. You're spending this money to understand, establish a baseline, what your cost per click might be, what your conversion rate might be, what the traffic quality looks like, and so on. Then the second month is about optimizing based on that data. Still, don't expect to see a lot, but hopefully you'll see something, and then kind of move forward from there. And again, 1 month, 2 months, these are just examples. A lot of it depends on the volume of traffic that you're able to push through the campaigns. For slightly larger budgets, you can move faster because you have more data. But I think that's the most important piece, is to express that the beginning is more about buying data, establishing the baseline, and understanding the impact of these campaigns so that you can properly build out the right expectation after that.
So that is an amazing answer, because I've never heard somebody said buying data, and I'm going to have to use that for myself when I get impatient. But that is a nice way to put it. I've never thought of that. So thank you very much for that. The next question, this one's a little bit more specific. And so do you know where the data manager is they're asking specifically the older version of Google Ads?
I don't know if it's available in the older version of Google Ads. You can look under linked accounts, but I think it's only visible in the newer one from what I've seen so far.
Okay, that's interesting, because I had not heard of that. So thank you for sharing that. And then the next question that we had is, let me see here. What strategy would you suggest for Performance Max when managing health-related campaigns, just with all the policy limitations that feed into the data?
Yeah, so there are certain categories where you just might not want to use Performance Max. I think a lot of that is going to be health and medical, finance, legal. There are ways to do it, but it is tricky because your ad can show up in random places for random keywords and then put random things in the copy. But in those cases, if you want to use Performance Max, like just make sure that you turn off automatic asset creation, URL expansion. Make sure you have brand exclusions in place, things of that nature. You could also ask Google support to attach a negative keyword list to your Performance Max campaign so that you can add negative keywords on an ongoing basis. But obviously there are limited controls with Performance Max, but as long as you hold on to whatever you can, you might be able to be compliant.
Okay. No, that makes sense as well. I have run that for healthcare also. I guess, though you should never assume, I assumed it was not placing them in, and violating some of those privacy policies. But I do remember there was a rumor at the beginning that it was sort of a workaround. I don't know. I don't want to think about it. You don't want to break the laws there.
I mean, it's definitely tricky, but I think one of the cool things about Performance Max for something like healthcare is that Google does not allow retargeting for healthcare. You can't build retargeting lists.
Correct.
I don't have any specific data on it, but my guess is that without building a retargeting audience, PMax will have some level of retargeting built in because it knows who clicked on the ads algorithmically. So it likely can help in that way, but again, not 100% sure.
That makes sense. And so the other question that we had was for demand gen. So demand gen for building branding and awareness campaigns. What is your concept around that?
So it's still very early days, but similar to what you might do on like YouTube, you could run brand lift studies, things of that nature. But what I've seen is that it won't convert as well, but it does fill that top of the funnel. So if you have a good pipeline, you've got a strong website, you're building audiences, recapturing people later on, it could really push, but it will drive conversions, but likely at less efficiency than like your standard campaigns, because it's really focusing on increasing exposure of your brand.
That's also a good point. And I think that those of us that aren't running PMax are sort of looking to those of you that are. So continue, to put your thought leadership out there on this, so we don't get FOMO. But I'm sure you may be the demand gen guy after the PMax guy potentially.
See what happens. we're still testing.
100%. But I do like how you said that. That is the reality in our space. We're kind of live testing at times.
Exactly.
Being able to do that. So Carla actually did clarify her healthcare question a little bit. She's talking about, so from a compliance standpoint, she's worried that she's not able to optimize the campaign because she can't feed it her own data, which that is correct.
Right. Because when you're working with HIPAA compliance, a lot of the data cannot be shared.
Correct.
The question is if there is a way to do it. I'm not 100% sure, but you can look at hashing your customer data and transferring it that way. It might be okay. I'm not a compliance lawyer, but there are things like that. But again, one of the cool things about Performance Max is that, again, like it knows who clicked on the ad. So even if like the tracking pixel can't track it, it's got its own algorithmic data that it can layer on. And so that there's likely some benefit of that aspect.
So what I was wondering, and I think, so my experience managing a healthcare PMax client was very similar. I simply looked at the diagnosis of what that was and tried to add audiences that I thought, like in-market audiences that I thought would have potentially that disease that would go after. And then, so how in Performance Max, it'll actually feed back to you the audiences they're indexing.
Right.
I would then take those and add those back as signals into the campaign. Yeah. But again, it could have been chasing its own tail. You sort of have to do what you have to do. But I think Carla's question's good.
Yeah. So for audience signals, that's definitely a tricky piece for healthcare. But I think the other part of offline conversion tracking could still be accomplished in a HIPAA compliant way, because you're not sending any P2 data. It just has the Google Click ID, and you're just saying like a conversion action happened, and here's the revenue value if you have it. So that piece is really more crucial than the audience signal. So if you have that and enough of that data coming in, the system can on its own start to figure out who to target, because it sees what's driving revenue.
Yeah, no, that absolutely makes sense. So I actually had a couple questions for you as well, especially when you got into Performance Max and the lead gen. So what about long lead cycles? So like a B2B client, how would you handle that? I would assume, my interpretation of your slides would be similar, and then maybe potentially update that conversion window in the platform to like 180 days. But can you talk a little bit about that?
As far as I know, offline conversion tracking only has a 90-day window. You have to import it. So it definitely, for anything that has a longer sales cycle, it's a bit tricky. But what we try to do is just find whatever sales pipeline steps mean something. So like, again, if you start out with 100 leads came in today, and 60 of them progressed to qualified, like these are sales qualified leads. I was able to talk to somebody. They're looking for what I'm selling. That's a very, very big signal for the system to slice out 40% of the people who's already, like we know, is garbage. So, that's something that happens pretty quickly. And so use that data. But, the further you could get in the pipeline, follow it as best as you can, an appointment scheduled, needs analysis started, so the more data you can get, even if it's not an ultimate sale, you can start projecting towards it.
Okay. All right. No, that's also a very good point. And then it's interesting. I felt like you had answered a lot of questions. I think what you talked about with spam was a very, very important point that you made there. What about, and this would actually also apply to B2B, probably healthcare, and actually it probably just universally applies. And I'm sorry to ask this, but the freaking assets. This is a struggle for clients who do not have the video. What are you doing as far as those challenges?
So start with images because they're easier.
Yep.
Build image assets, taking customer reviews, your big headlines, stock photography, and so on. If you can get any video, start with that and edit it. I think one of the most underutilized features I've seen in Google Ads is they have some pretty cool AI video editing tools. There's one that you can do voiceovers on video just by typing in, and it will build a voiceover. There's another where you can upload any video of any length, and it will automatically create algorithmically edited videos of 6 seconds, 15 seconds, 30 seconds, and you can use those in your Performance Max campaigns or even put them on Facebook ads. But I found that that's a really good way of coming up with something better than nothing. And lastly, maybe even just using stock footage to create something. As long as, the automatically created videos I don't love, but using these tools to build your own can be very helpful.
Yeah, no, I think that those are all valid points. Now, is there anything, because you've been probably running Performance Max, I mean, I don't know if you've been running it since beta, but you're probably one of the longest running PMax PPC experts in the industry. So is there anything that you thought right away that you no longer think with regards to Performance Max?
We did start trying it while it was in beta, and I think the first one I tried it on was lead gen. And I was like, all right, this is never going to work. But we found ways to make it work. And I think that encapsulates my approach to all this stuff is like, it is what it is. Now, how do we figure out how to best utilize it? And so there's a lot of that kind of stuff. The cool thing is you see that Google is listening to people in the community because they're implementing a lot of changes to Performance Max based on the feedback that we've given them. So I'm excited to see where it goes, but it's constantly changing.
Yeah, no, I would definitely agree with that. And so I guess my last question, speaking of new Performance Max features, what are your thoughts around the brand negatives? Because it seems to me like those were added after we had sort of accepted it. And I had sort of told my clients at that point, like, this is a thing that's happening. But
Right.
Did you go back in time and add all the negatives? What's your thought, case by case?
Yeah, so from the get-go, before brand exclusions, Google did give you the ability to add negative keywords through support or a Google rep. So we did do that for some clients in the beginning. My thoughts on brand exclusion is that you shouldn't exclude brand every time. It really depends on the case. For smaller brands, we don't like to exclude it. For larger brands, when you're looking to scale new customer acquisition, we do. But again, like I mentioned before, if you ask Google to add a negative keyword list instead of just a negative keyword to a Performance Max campaign, you can edit that list in real time in the back end without Google support's help. But going forward, we typically just use the brand exclusions. It works pretty well. And I think the reason Google built it that way is that it also works with what they're trying to implement on search campaigns, using brand lists as a way to target in almost the opposite way. Like you can build a brand campaign with your brand list and broad match keywords. So it's going to be a lot to sort of like what's coming in the future with brand themes, keyword themes, search themes, that kind of thing. So see what happens with it.
I mean, that's sort of the reality we live in today. We sort of all learn together. So we have 1 minute left. So I guess I will ask just one last question, and then I want to give our sponsors one last shout out. So my last question is, have you ever just said Performance Max doesn't work in this scenario?
Yeah. Okay. And it definitely does not work for everyone. There's numerous cases where we've tried tried everything and just couldn't get it right and shut it off. Or sometimes where it worked, but maybe a combination of search and YouTube worked better. So it's definitely not the answer to everything, but it's definitely worth a shot. It is very powerful if used in the right way for your business.
Yeah, no, that absolutely makes sense. So with that, with the last 15 seconds, I do want to say one more time, Jumpfly, Clever Programmatic, and AdWorld Experience are our sponsors. We're thankful that we have sponsors in this great organization. So thank you for being here, and we'll see you on Slack.
Awesome. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Menachem.
Okay.
Have a good one. All right, bye.
Bye.